All right. Well, hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today for our webinar, Strengthening the Therapeutic Alliance. I'm Nancy Boas from Sparta Science. And before we get started, I just want to go over a few things. You are in listen-only mode, but feel free to ask questions today using the question panel. This will be recorded, and we'll be sure to send the recording out after the webinar so that you can rewatch it or share it with colleagues, etc. Let me go ahead and introduce our guests today. If we could just go into the next slide. We are delighted to have with us Steve Fell, who I know has a lot of, there's a lot of initials after the name here, and Steve, you can tell us more about that. But let me tell you just a little bit about Steve's background. He's the owner of Performance Science Rehab, and he has spent most of his career and his life in the world of high performance sports, first as an athlete and now as a rehab and performance specialist in professional sports, and is a Tier 1 military performance advisor. Steve, super excited to have you here today.
Great to be here, Nancy. Thanks a lot for that intro.
Sure. And then let me just introduce Jeremy Hall, who is going to be our moderator and chime in alongside Steve. Jeremy Hall is here at Sparta Science, has been here for a few months, recently joined us, and works within the healthcare arena to work with our partners and customers to improve their outcomes. And prior to joining Sparta, he actually spent 10 years in sports medicine, performance, and rehab. And now he's actually transitioned into the digital health realm, where he works with customers to integrate technology into their clinical workflows. So I will let you two take it away. And again, please, audience, feel free to ask questions as we go along.
Awesome. Thanks, Nancy. Really appreciate that. Steve, I think before we get too far down the road, I'd be a little remiss if I didn't have you talk a little bit about, your most recent experience, the World Cup. I don't know, if everyone that's listening in kind of knows about your work there, but just kind of helping us understand a little bit of, what that looks like, since most folks will never get that view, and then, how that also kind of fits within your practice in Florida.
Yeah, no, thanks, Jeremy. Appreciate it. And it's great to be here. Thanks for having me on. I love talking about all things high performance and how we can improve on systems and processes to push things forward. So thanks for giving me the platform to speak on it a little bit. My most recent trip that I was able to attend was Qatar 2022 with the U.S. men's national team as an assistant sports scientist. Amazing group of individuals that between Steve Tashton, Darcy Norman, Jordan Webb, Ron Chenault, and the rest of the crew on that side, Kenny Ishii, Derek Lawrence, all these guys are in my eyes, the top of the top, and to just be able to spend time with them for the past year and work alongside them and support them in everything that they do and they've created over the past 4 years has been, it's been unbelievable, and I'm just incredibly lucky to have had that opportunity. So, with that said, my role within that group of elite practitioners was really to support them in all areas, so whether it be on the performance side for gym work or supplemental field work, or whether it be on the sports science side, helping like the genius that Jordan Webb is, do some of the tasks that don't require his attention that I could take off his plate, that are very low level but do require attention to help him do some big modeling that he's always after, or whether it be helping the athletic training staff support any of the athletes who are perhaps struggling with bridging from table to field, That's kind of where I lived, and then everything else in between, whether it was, working, gathering information, during pre-morning screens, or helping Darcy in the gym, or, helping with we had a really cool recovery lab. That was amazing, for the players. Whether it was help running some of those initiatives to make sure guys were getting themselves back to neutral so that they could go again. It was kind of like this really cool role of, diving in and out of a lot of different things and working along that performance and rehab continuum.
That's really, really cool. Yeah, I think that's, obviously, I think a lot of folks going through PT school or, trained to be ATCs and strength coaches, that's always that level that everyone's kind of probably has at some part of the back of their brain, would wonder what it's like, would love to be there. I think what's interesting is, that typical clinic environment that, most folks are operating in, that probably has a blend of, folks who are there for performance, right? The athletes that are rehabbing, military that have to get back to, being able to deploy and do all the stuff they have to do. And then all the way down, right, to your older folks having their total knees and just want to kind of get back to, living their lives and doing the things they want to do. Where do you really see, that performance model, what aspects of that model do you really see having that application really all the way down, across the spectrum?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and it's a question I get a lot from, people who are maybe coming out of school, or, who are maybe have always been in a certain setting for their career, and, they ask, the very similar question, and my response is always, first, like, what is the context, of what you're talking about. So if it's when you say high performance, what is that to you? And I think that's the starting point. Then you can answer the question well, I think, for the individual. So I always make sure I say to them, high performance is, for a professional athlete that's just played in a World Cup match, is different from high performance for someone who's had a total knee but wants to get back to surfing, right? To that individual, both activities are high performing activities. So that's where I always try to get clarification in that, in that kind of situation, just because, I think, are the little nitty gritty details different from one environment to the next? Of course, but are the principles and the framework for which you operate on helping somebody bridge their high performance activity different? And I would argue, no, they're not. They're very much the same thing within a framework that's super flexible, based off of, your resources, your time that you're able to commit to helping the individual in front of you, basically, bridge their performance gaps. And that's the reason they've come to you. So I always say, you start with principle approach first. That's a framework. And then that framework is very flexible, based off of whatever situation you're in, and for who's ever in front of you. Because it's very easy, I think, for younger practitioners, who see, sports, and they see the games, they see maybe a training session, and they see someone who is, having a hard time ascending and descending stairs, and that, to them, that it doesn't cross their thought process that is high performance, that climbing up and down stairs isn't high performance. And I would argue, same principles, same framework that you would do to bridge to get that person back. It's just, where is the starting point, and what are how can you manage the expectations of both individuals, so that they can complete their demands, or complete the activity to meet the demands that the activity imposes on them.
Yeah, I think that's really, and I know, you and I now in a few conversations, right, we kind of, both are really interested and think about, language, right? And the language that gets used, and that, how that gets framed, and what that context and what that kind of perception is around it, can really shape, not only, how a practitioner approaches it, right, but also how a patient kind of receives it and thinks about it. And that performance it's a spectrum, right, from a big scale, and then also on an individual scale, level, right? So, I think that's awesome that, it kind of starts with communication, right, and making sure that you're level setting communication at the top. So, I mean, what is, the therapeutic alliance? When you kind of use that term, how do you look at that? How do you kind of define that for yourself?
Yeah. I think it's, I really started to become interested in this whole idea of, um, like a high performance team. You know, I'll be honest. You see a lot of high level organizations that call themselves a high performance team, but they're very siloed in how they communicate certain aspects of a player, and because it's not, most of the time it's not out of malice, it's only because of the lack of processes and systems in place to facilitate conversation that is holistic and complete for that individual. So when I think about this like therapeutic alliance concept, for me it's who are all the stakeholders involved in this patient's care, and I'm not talking just strictly, like a medical. I'm not. It's, yes, the MD, yes, the physio or the physical therapist and athletic trainer, but is this a high school athlete? Do they have a strength coach at their high school? Who's the coach? It doesn't matter if they're a youth setup, right? Like, who are these people, and how can we help this athlete or this high performing person that's in front of us? Okay, bridge whatever gap they have, so that they can return and do what they do. And if if the person within that circle is part of their plan of care or influences, for example, a great example is like loading strategies, right? If you're working with someone who like a say like an adolescent athlete, and they are still training but they're coming to see you, you know stimulus for them is going to be their training session, right? So having communication with the coach on, hey, this is what we see, this is what we believe the loading strategy should be for on field, um, to help bridge that gap is really important. And I've had people say, how do you even do that? That doesn't work. And I would say it's the hardest part is opening the door of lines and communication with the coach to begin that process, because it's not perfect, but it absolutely works if you can build the relationship in and around that person's team, and it doesn't matter if you're in a professional setting or if you're in a private sector setting. The biggest barrier I see there is that people are just it's time is a big one, and then really lacking really putting it, in my opinion, putting it on the back burner, that it's not that important for that person to bridge their gap, when I believe it's the biggest thing, because the biggest loading strategies that will occur with individuals is typically outside of when they see you, in a clinic type setting. So therapeutic alliance, it's the key stakeholders that are surrounding that individual's, or influence that individual care.
Yeah. Yeah. I know something that you've said before is, um, does that patient get better when they're in the clinic, or all those hours when they're outside the clinic, right? So it's, doing the right things to set them up for success, and to get them physiologically right on the right path, and ready to do all those other things. But it's all those other hours and all those other people that are touching them that are having that, same impact, right?
Totally. I think that's a really good point. And I was like this early on too. It's like you want to think that, everything that you're doing in the clinic is the reason why that individual is better. And I think that's, we've just gone to school for a long time and, we put a lot of time and effort in trying to figure things out and differential diagnose. And that's certainly a part of it. But, if we're logical about that, they're seeing you for 45 to 60 minutes once a week, maybe, twice a week, maybe. And the rest of that time they're out of your hands. So it's really, I think the educational piece that goes into that. So what you do facilitates, kind of leads them down to the stream, right? And then what you're able to instill and in their mindset, prior to them leaving, it's kind of, I think, where you get your biggest gains from helping people get back, in a more safe and quick manner.
Yeah. I mean, that makes, I think that's where when people think of, or maybe not everyone, has visibility into all of the people on, if we're thinking of that sports model, a high performance sport model, all of the team and all of the people that are touching all the individual aspects. And, if that information's siloed, then you're going to keep running into bottlenecks, right? Or you're not going to have that efficiency. Obviously even harder, right? When you're out external and you're having to kind of in your community, communicate with those folks, get everyone on the same page. How have you developed, the processes or, kind of that shared language that, the message is not losing, fidelity if it's going, the healthcare route versus the performance route?
Yeah. No, it's for me, it's like, no matter in it other than, okay, one of the strategies I'll do, what's your coach's number? Who's the physician? Let's get everybody on a text chain, and it can be as low tech as that is just making an introduction. Other avenues that I've gone, is that I do quite often and work with some people outside to really put something together from a performance profile standpoint and get that to appropriate individuals, so that they have an idea on, where they're coming from, and every time they follow up, that updated information, updated profile information is getting sent right to, in this case, let's call it the physician. If you're lucky enough to have some good relationships with some physicians, I have found that when you can provide some kind of, if you show that you are consistent with the messaging, that every client that you see that might have to go back and forth, if you clearly demonstrate, that, hey, this is how I operate from a communication standpoint. For example, sharing a performance profile that looks at aspects of movement, aspects of force production, aspects of strength, and then you show, a trend over time of, here's where things are changing, here's where things are not changing, getting worse, getting better. When you open that door and you show that consistently, you'd be surprised how many physicians are very, very open to having 30-minute conversations with you on the phone after a long day of work, because in the end, I'm learning and see that, they're just as desperate to have allies when they do a surgery, that can really help bridge the gap and help them look good, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's like, that's people, their work gets criticized a lot, but through that, I guess, almost ego-driven approach, that helps the athlete even better, even more so. So I think the, for me, it always starts with talking to the client about, hey, what do you do? And if they're talking about, some sort of sporting events, some sort of referral, from a medical professional, maybe they're seeing a chiro or a chiropractor or a massage therapist or any of those key stakeholders that are involved in that person, saying, I get that information and I make sure every single person has that profile on hand. And I leave things open to questions, is there anything, that you see in here that, is surprising, or would you say this is spot on, or, can we collaborate on this person's coming on Monday, trainings on a Wednesday, how can we modify some things so that they don't mess up your plan? So it really, it sounds like a lot, but really you can solve this a lot in just having text message conversations, and obviously phone conversations as well. And that's in the private sector. So in the professional setting, it's a lot of times doesn't happen, but how we, I'll use the national team as an example. What they have done there from a top to bottom point of making sure lines of communication are clear and obvious is, is built-in meetings, right? Built-in meetings every single day after to review what's happened with every player. Where can you improve, right? That's always the first question. It's not what do we do really well, but where can we get better, and how can we do that? And also, you highlight some points that, but I think, a lot of us aren't in that environment, right? So when it's, again, that principles-based approach, right? Just because you don't have everybody right there and it's convenient to have a meeting, you can still do what you can do with this low-hanging fruit of just taking the responsibility on yourself to talk to these key stakeholders in the person's plan of care, and really help them. And I think that opens up the world, to when you start doing that.
Yeah, I think that's really, you touched on, a lot of really good points in there. I think, one of them being that something that any, practicing clinician knows, I think in pretty much any environment, right, is feels like there's not enough time, the resources I don't have, my clinic, I have to see X number of patients a day. That doesn't leave time, for all of these other things. Maybe a couple questions here. What do you see as saying those are table stakes? We all experience it. There could always be more time, no matter what your job is, right? Even if you're not a clinician. But what are some maybe, self-imposed barriers that that prevent people from being able to really establish those pathways? And, I think maybe speaking a little bit to, which, again, is an area that I know both of us, feel strongly about, but kind of, standard operating procedures, systematizing your practice, more than, we're maybe trained to.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think, for me, it always starts with, like, your perspective, like how do you choose to think about the situation that you're in? And that, for a lot of individuals, maybe on this webinar, that might be, I have to see 15 patients a day, in a way, it's like, okay, that is something that is part of your current environment. It's like, so what is the solution, rather than like, woe is me type of deal, right? What's the solution to this, where you put the client first, right? And you still make people feel like they are getting the attention that's why they're coming to see you. And for me, it reverts back to two things. It's every practitioner should have their own working methodology on how they go about treating and bridging somebody to performance. I think one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was from a good mentor of mine, Paul Caffrey, was to really write this down and to have it as your own document. And when you do that, okay, it changes. But at least now you have a reference on how you do things, and it's okay for it to change because it's a flexible framework. So I think it starts there. I think you can't copy you can take elements of things from other people. That's okay. But to take how somebody does it, who has a certain personality and has a certain way about him or her, and then try to put it into your own, it rarely works, right? Because it's not you, it's not your flow, it's not how you see things or view things, and or maybe kind of think about a client at that specific time. But if you have a way that principles that you operate off of, then that makes it way easier to be way more timely, hear people more clearly, put it into action more effectively. So that's the big one for me, is like every individual should constantly work on honing how they view the return to performance continuum, and how they operate within that how they operate on that continuum in different aspects, whether they're on the table or they're in between the table and their field court, or water sport, and or in their sporting event. So that for me is when you're doing that, then the next piece is, okay, how much time do I have? And then you combine that with what are the non-negotiables that I need to be able to get that are going to help this person the most, because we know that time is a limited resource, and we know that this is going to be a big bang for your buck. And if they can get over this hump, then the educational piece that we do where they're going to be outside the clinic is going to be way more manageable. And I think combining those two things, I think is a very effective way where you can see, although not ideal, you can see several patients, okay, and still do it in a way that I think is responsible, and that I think, in the end of the day, benefits the person that you're working with.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really, just kind of point out, there are a couple questions came in. One of them, well, I'm going to just kind of push pause on, because we'll definitely get to it a little bit later. But in creating relationships with physicians and that outreach and really building that, have you found that it's more powerful to demonstrate your knowledge, maybe kind of the depth and breadth of your knowledge, or is it does it come down more to being able to communicate simply in a way that just kind of clicks?
It's all about communication. All about communication. Best teachers are the one that can take a complicated subject and teach it to a first grader, and I think at the end of the day, and this is my opinion and my experience, I have found the best approach is one that is organized, concise, to the point, but so you're able to answer things in depth if asked upon. Okay. And I think that approach for me has worked really, really well. And I know from a relationship building standpoint, every time that you can do that effectively and understand that everybody's time is a finite resource, especially, physicians, right? I mean, we all have a finite amount of time. So respecting the time, respecting the boundaries, but being consistent on how you deliver a message about one patient to the next. I have found that, you do one patient like that, you might not hear back, but the same patient, you're still sending that. You're still sending, and then all of a sudden they want to have a conversation. You explain, and now that relationship is built because they see what you're doing is just part of how you do things. It's part of your process. And it's almost, you're not doing it to get this person to send you everyone, you're doing it. I mean, that is a benefit. Yes, that happens for sure. I'm not, but the main objective is, you're doing it for the client. And by doing it the right way, doors always open. And because clients are getting better, and everybody involved is happy. So I think, does it always work out like that? No, there's people I still send stuff to over the past, 15, 16 months, and I've never heard a wink, but that's okay. Because in the end, the client is involved in their process, and they know that that's happening, right? They know that the communication is being delivered. And in the end, just them seeing how much you are going that little extra distance to help them helps them improve their condition, right? Just knowing someone cares like that is I think is something you can't quantify, but it is definitely a massive piece in the whole process.
Yeah. I think that really actually feeds pretty nicely into that next point of um, being able to deliver that message in a way that is right, understandable, hopefully pretty quickly, or in a way that you can see, progress over time, right? If we're talking the physician, it's, hey, this is the gains that we've made, or maybe where we've stalled out, and maybe we need another set of eyes on this. But we're obviously going to talk about the technologies, Sparta, where that's part of the reason that, we've been able to work with you and do a lot of great things. But really, at a foundational level, how do you use data to have that communication, but also, being able to present that back to a patient in a way that gives them some context as well that they can kind of hold on to.
Yeah, no, I think, data is amazing. It's something that, it's, that a lot of people have a lot of opinions about, and some love it, some hate it, and for me, it's strictly a tool that helps to understand, where somebody's coming from, where they need to go, right? So an example of that is if you understand the demands of what somebody has done prior to an injury, okay? And I'll use soccer as an example because that has been where I've primarily operated. We have, so much information on, what their stimulus, or what their outputs are, right? So it's easy to work backwards from that, and develop things to help bridge that gap to appropriately return them to handle the demands of playing in a chaotic sporting event, right? So that's where data is super helpful, right? It really helps you. I think it does a few things. For one, it tells you a starting point and an ending point, right? So you can now begin to, and for lack of a better analogy, like mathematically, kind of say, all right, okay, how can we slowly build up some of these metrics, to help get this person to this point, right? Where these are the demands they need to get. And if they can handle these and tolerate them well, then we know that they're in a good spot. So, but everything in between in building that is kind of where us as practitioners have to, kind of use a little bit of, it's a little bit of an art, right? And understanding how, what thing to implement and when not to implement, and when to push and when not to push. So, the data for me helps guide that process responsibly, because at the end of the day, data is, you can have all the data in the world, but if it's not being used consistently, and you're never going to able to draw conclusions based off of what you're looking at in that particular time. So what I'm saying there is that you really need to implement systems within your structure that you can do consistently and do them consistently well to help guide your decision making in a way that is, really effective, and not just like, oh, here's a data point and we didn't do something for 3 months. Here's another data point. Oh, we must have to, it's this way to really, I think, as practitioners, hold ourselves responsible, because there has definitely been times, like no question, where you would do a jump test, okay? You would do a jump test and you see a high drive score, okay? And a high load score and a low explode, right? And you're like, wow, I have like missed the boat on this implementation of therapeutic exercise to help bridge a little bit of a pillar strength gap, and that's detrimental, right? But if you don't have checks and balances along the way of your in your process, then you don't catch that, right? So in a way, I think it protects the client, because it holds the practitioner accountable and allows us to kind of move in and out of the implements that we're trying to give these individuals to help bridge the gap more appropriately. That for me is the biggest thing. And then when clients see the information and they see progress, okay, and then you start to go into, or they have a small setback, and then you start to go into, how do we adapt? What's this whole adaptation recovery situation that needs to occur to get us higher? It breaks down barriers with communication. It breaks down the barrier of communication with the client so that they can understand their condition. And when they see things start to improve, it's no consequence that their condition improves, right? Their mindset improves, their perception of the pain, or their perception of, not being able to do a certain thing improves. And I'm just such a big believer that when you can back that up objectively, have the conversation, they see that you really care, the trust is established, outcomes are always going to be better. Always, always, always going to be better in my experience.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think to your point, I think that just like performance, that word in people's minds, right, has kind of different meanings and different interpretations. That's where I think data, similarly, a lot of therapists, I think of, they hear data and they think computer, they think technology, and right, range of motion is data, right? Pain is data. As you're collecting all of these pieces, right, hopefully they're forming a picture of what's going on with that patient, diagnostically, and then also from a progress standpoint, right? And I think in a lot of the tests and measures that we still kind of rely on aren't necessarily as objective as they could be, right? It's still a lot of pushing on someone's arm or leg and saying, no, that's a 4 versus a 4 plus or a 4 minus. And, I think on the one hand, right, the more information, as long as it's good, relevant information, right, creates a more complete picture. And then having that happen a little more frequently lets you see that change a little more clearly, right? If we're only kind of doing it the front and the middle and the end, then we're maybe missing a lot of information in the middle that could have made those the duck and weave a little tighter and a little straighter. So how are you from a capture standpoint, you use a lot of different tools. I know, from capturing it and the frequency of it, how are you approaching measurement so that you're always kind of keeping an eye on that progress?
Yeah. So, I think one thing for sure is like, it's almost like a daily conversation, right? Because what you do one day and how you respond to that makes all the difference, so have a plan that you have, and you give a home exercise plan, you give it to the individual. Well, if they're struggling the next day because what they did prior, it was they just didn't respond well, it's important information to know. So then that is a big piece of what we try to do that I try to do personally, is basically have the conversation with individuals. If I know they have a strength piece plan that day, but they're not going to be in the clinic, or if they have a certain run, or if they have a session in the water, we have that communication. And if there's, hey, I actually don't feel great, okay, you know what, we pivot and we revert back to this strategy. And then the next day they feel great. Okay, now's the time to push, right? So I think that is a barrier sometimes in the clinic, is that we see somebody and then we don't see them again until next week. Well, and the part of my principle and the framework I operate in is like, once you're in the ecosystem, you're in, and you're part of it. So if you're in, then you're going to get text messages and you're going to get conversations. And I think people really like that, because it does help, again, drive their care, give them some oversight, when they're not in the clinic. But then, I'll use the Sparta, force plates, for example. Everybody that I work with, they're doing it once a week, when they're coming in, and I use it I use it in a ton of different ways. I use it to look at fatigue, I use it to look at fatigue. I use it to look at programming different elements of strength, when you have the context of what they're trying to get back to. I use it, in older populations to just understand, educate on, hey, listen, you see this ability to stand on one leg, and you see how you did it well this today, but not so much this time. Why do you think that is? And then it opens up the conversation. So, at the minimum, it allows you to have the conversation with the person on what they've actually done since they've seen you last. And I think you find out a lot about that. Maybe they're not as compliant. That's okay, because that's part of the process. But at least now that they see, they're like, oh wow, I'm like, I better button up. I think this person really cares about how I'm doing, and then that's motivating for people. So, but for me, that's a pillar in the clinic, is that if assuming no acute pain is on board, we're doing it. Whether it's the plank, whether it's the double leg, and I'm getting the beta, the single leg right now, which has been for me game changing. When you're looking at some of these high end athletes who are looking to bridge the gap, who've had maybe some knee stuff going on, and then also the balance. So it's really nice to see people do this week in, week out. Then after a month, they look back at their 4 tests, and they see the progress and of specifically of what they've been working on. And it just, it's inspiring for them. And at the end of the day, it makes them extremely happy, because now they're that much closer to getting back to what, they're coming in for. So for me, that's really kind of like one of the main pillars in my current setup.
Yeah, that's helpful even to think of, right? As you're, maybe I think where some people struggle, right, is if you're applying the same measurement kind of structure and frequency to everybody, regardless, right? Obviously, with as long as they're able to do it, right, and you're picking the appropriate things. But being able to do that consistently over and over and over and over again on one patient, on every patient, that starts to maybe give information about not just the people who are walking through your door, but how you're operating, right? And if you're seeing trends in your outcomes, or in you're seeing folks not making the improvements you expect. So how, I guess, maybe speaking a little bit to you're capturing that baseline and that consistent frequency across everybody. How are you using that to prioritize either your work or the things that you're having the patient then pay more attention to when they're outside?
Yeah. I think, and again, it comes back to what we've been talking about before, about having this methodology, this own personal methodology, just belief system on how you operate, your principles that you operate within your framework. So, for me, Sparta Science, the force plates and the ability for you to capture some of these explosive actions, right, objectively, is really tough, but they do it, which is why I'm so attracted to it and love it. Okay, because while it is a piece of the whole thing, right? So I like to bucket things, right? So you have your movement bucket, you have your dynamic movement bucket, you have your strength bucket, you have your force expression and absorption buckets, right? Or your braking buckets, right? And then your explosive action buckets. So I think you need to, it's important for people to not look at one thing as like the holy grail, but collectively you're looking at all of this. So for me, my personal thought is that, the movement is the foundation, right? And I'm sure a lot of people the same way, but it's the foundation, right? So we know limitations of motor control or mobility is going to affect, right, the way that we can coordinate movement. So identifying those big rocks first, then looking at how people move globally, look at how people move globally slow on a little bit more of an unstable way, and then look at how people move globally fast, right? And then understanding the components that make up those patterns, those global movements, whether that's isolated strength pieces. For me, I tend to, I think patterns are the best way to kind of go about doing it. But I do acknowledge that when you're weak and have a deficit in a certain muscle group, you should address it. And I do like the idea of addressing it in isolation, but it has to quickly be integrated into some pattern, for it to have a lot of, to bridge a lot of a gap, so just knowing where movement deficits lie, strength deficits lie, and then how you can coordinate those very slowly to very fast, really paints the picture. And I'll give an example if that's all right. I mean, just using Sparta's movement signature, like from load, explode, and drive. And there might be people not familiar with what that looks like, but the explode aspect is a lot of like how you transfer forces that you create. So transferring forces that you create is, very much a core, right, or your pillar, right, from hips to thorax, right? And we all know as physical therapists and physios and strength coaches, like proximal stability is critical. So if you see somebody who has great ability to express force and great ability to create force, but are poor, okay, at putting it through the system, right? That's a problem. And the analogy that I always explain or give to kind of the people I work with, and it tends to stick, is you have two athletes or two clients of the exact same height, weight, build, age, sex, all of that. One has a very good explode metric, which would signify like your pillar, your core, your pillar strength, while the other has a low. Everything else is equal. The person that has a low explode, but very well, they can show great numbers. Driving your load, they can show great numbers, but in the end, that's going to physiologically cost that individual $5. Okay, where it's going to physiologically cost the one with the good pillar $1. So if you have $20 in the bank, how many explosive actions are you able to produce before fatigue gets on board? And we all know what fatigue does to the ability to be athletic and create explosive actions in chaotic environments, right? It's a big, it could potentially be a big driver for injury potentially. So that's one way that I like to look at this information is, do they move well? Okay. Do they move well in isolation? Do they move well globally? Do they move well, while coordinating some sort of global pattern that we're familiar with, such as locomotion? And can they do it explosively? And that I will operate with along that continuum. And if the foundation isn't set, then that's the starting point. And a lot of times, if you work on those little things that are not sexy, you quickly find that things bridge very quickly when you just get a better environment for the person to kind of operate off of and express themselves.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I think what we've tried to do with Sparta and with the outputs, right, that are there for the clinicians, should also be able to help inform that conversation, right, and give patients something that gives them some context. I think a lot of times, right, we get our measurements, we're collecting that information, it kind of goes into the chart, goes into a bit of a black box from the patient's perspective, and then we kind of ask them to do stuff and we check in. But part of what we've tried to do is provide that feedback loop for the provider, also something for a patient to see and visualize and contextualize. A couple of questions that came in, and I think these should kind of dovetail together well. If you'd like to answer them separately, but how do you communicate with the patient or that the team around that patient when they aren't getting better?
Mm-hmm.
And then if you don't see clients every week, if you don't see that particular, what's the best way to support them and motivate them to do the exercises?
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm curious if kind of in regards to the document, you kind of have a Google document that you collaborate with patients on, whether you feel like that's a valuable tool, alongside to, have those conversations.
Yeah, no, I think, to the first point, like if someone is struggling to return. And, we all have those individuals. That's, unfortunately, we can't get everyone to a point as quickly as we would like, or we can't assist them as quickly as they would like. So, the first is, I think, really goes back to establishing that trust at the very beginning and being with them and acknowledging that they're, hey, listen, yeah, we hear you, we hear you, but this is the solution. This is the solution. And I think, as opposed to feeding into it, or blaming. I do see some people that blame patients for not getting better. And while that exists, right, the majority of the time, it's not the patient's fault. At the end of the day, it's the practitioners looking at it in a different way that is not maybe appropriate for that individual. Okay, and we're all guilty of that. Myself I'm definitely included in that. So when that happens, leaning on other practitioners in your practice or people you trust to come get another set of eyes does a few things. It gives a different perspective, okay, and it shows that individual, wow, they really care. I have people in my practice that I work with, and then I have an amazing practitioner that works alongside me, and she, I mean, amazing. Like, there's people that just go right to her after that, and it's amazing, and I'm like, wow, that's incredible. I think we should all be as lucky. I think we should all feel very lucky to have those people around, because there isn't one person for, there are people that suit others differently. And I think us being humble enough to recognize that is another important piece. But I think it starts with get somebody else in to have another set of eyes, but don't discount that trust building aspect at the very beginning, anticipating those moments to happen, and that they trust that, hey, we're going to find a solution. We're going to go down this road. And if this doesn't work, no problem. We're going to pivot, and we're going to try this. Okay, because of X, Y, and Z. And if that doesn't work, that's okay. We're bringing this other person in, and we're going to continue to move it forward, but we're not going to just wish it and will it away. Okay, because we have all this objective data that's saying, hey, a lot of times you have to remind people, oh man, I'm bummed. I'm like, not getting better. Well, it's like, oh, hey, let's look here. 7 out of 10 pain when you came in, right? 6 out of 10 pain when you came in, 3 out of 10 pain, 1 out of 10 pain. You're doing some of this field work based stuff, and these strength numbers have bridged, and these load, explode, and drive numbers have equalized more so than when we first started. So that's another great thing about having data and historically showing it, is that when patients have pain, everybody's perception is different. So, if they're not 0 out of 10, they're still in pain, right? But if you can remind them, hey, you were at 7 out of 10, you're at 1 out of 10, you're doing this, 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 and this, and then you automatically see a switch. And it could be as simple as like just showing them that, walking them through that, and showing, hey, this is the normal process of adaptation. So embrace it, because you got to go through it, but you're moving in a great way. And then there was one part to that if you could.
Yeah, kind of getting buy-in, or not buy-in, but the compliance, and helping people really stay on, the plan and the program, like when they're not in front of you.
Yeah, and that's, again, just to reiterate, I can't stress enough the communication aspect. Utilizing wellness data, right? Fatigue scores, muscle scores. This is a great way this is low-hanging fruit to have meaningful conversation and give advice that is appropriate based off of what they have coming the next day. And then it also has a sense of accountability, because what something might elicit. That's a heavy session. That should be tough, and you're saying nothing. So then you can now have a conversation that puts them in a situation where they have to be honest that they didn't. Most people don't like to say that. So again, that's a way to kind of bridge that accountability gap and get them and keep them compliant.
Yeah. Something that I think the data also really can help with, right, and technologies can help with, is that that transparency for a patient, and being able to, I think you use, kind of a scorecard, right, with your patients of, the tests and measures and information that you're collecting, that kind of puts some skin in the game for you, right? Because you are showing someone, hey, I'm holding myself to these metrics and measures. So I'm going to do what I can, right? And then where they fit into that equation, and make sure everyone's on the same scorecard, right? It's getting scored the same way. And then how that carries over to physicians, right? And being able to say, hey, like, I'm going to show my work in a way that's easy to understand. It's visual, it's simple, all the things that you kind of touched on earlier. Have you found, I guess, what have you found the response to be from patients and from, the providers, when you really are, kind of that open book of, this is what we're going to hold ourselves to?
They love it, and it's like, the big thing is like a trust standpoint, and I think when you can manage the expectations, when you manage the expectations of the people that you're working with, and you say, listen, this is the plan, this is where we're going to go, this is what I would love for to happen, and it's not going to be this linear, right? It's going to be this linear, messy road, and then you're going to go here, right? So that's I try to be, having that initial conversation is important to manage those expectations. But then they get to a point, if they're coming into your clinic and they're like, it's jump day, baby, or if they're like, yep, okay, I got that 267 Newtons score on external rotation. Okay, I'm ready today. It was a 3 out of 10 pain, but it's going to be 1. When you have people starting to know, just like you would if you played sports, if you know what's coming, right? This is the warm up. This is the drill 1, drill 2, drill 3. Like, I think people like to know, and they like to anticipate that, versus just coming in, maybe not knowing who they're going to see, or they've been doing a plan, all of a sudden it's a completely different plan. People like the structure, and the information about where the endpoint is and anticipated mile markers along the way.
Yeah, that's really that feedback, creating a loop, right? And it's just like it would be in the clinic. It's test, retest, make sure what you're doing is working, right? It's creating a whole ecosystem, a whole structure of that information.
Totally.
So how have you been able to kind of use all the technologies, kind of big picture, as you kind of really zoom out, and both from your clinical standpoint, but also from that relationship standpoint, what has that really allowed you to do that you couldn't have maybe done just manual? Or
yeah, it takes a lot of the, it upgrades your level of care for that person, when you have these feedback loops. So if you look at something that is done consistently, like as an example, if someone comes into the clinic, what's an objective capture today? Is a movement screen objective? It's not objective, but it's subjective. But you can still include that because together they're powerful, right? Through information, wellness data, okay, is subjective, right? It's subjective. So it's like you can combine that with jump testing, right, as an objective measure. And those two, internal, external metrics, right, give you an idea about how that person is progressing, regressing, or just maintaining the same. So when you have those strategies built into your processes right away, where there's not even a question, this is what you do. When you come in, you're filling in this wellness data. And then we're looking at that trend line. And then what are we choosing? A strength, a jump, of movement skill, or are we doing a combination of all that and we're capturing that? Okay, let's do an intervention based off of what we're seeing there. We're doing a retest or a re-jump or a re-strength test or a movement skill, something that we did earlier. Okay, how was the response? Let's make sure that we capture that tomorrow, right? And then that information is then reported to everyone that's involved, and then as questions come up along the way, you can look people in the eye and say, I can't see into a crystal ball. However, this is how it's presenting. This is the response to these different training stimuli. I think we can move forward, hold back, or just stay the course until we can push it a bit more. So, it's not rocket science, in that regard. It just really comes down to having your systems in place, doing it consistently, and then, making yourself, not get lazy, right? And, you have an obligation to the individual who's coming in to see it, to help see it through, and not keep things siloed. So that's how I do it, and utilize some different tools for that. More than happy for people to, kind of, shoot me an email or anything, and I can go into a little bit more depth on what that looks like. But I do think that, starting with your own processes, how you like to do things, and then working your way from that is a process that never ends. So don't expect it to ever end. It is always going to be super frustrating, because you're never going to feel like it's done. And the second that you accept that it's never going to be done, the happier and less frustrated.
Great. I think you froze for a sec there, but I know we're coming up at the top of the hour, and I just want to let people know, if there are questions as we're kind of running out of time, go ahead and put them in the panel, and we'll be happy to answer those offline in the follow-up. But I'll turn it over to you, Jeremy, if you have just any final thoughts, key takeaways, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I Steve, really appreciate you, sharing all this information. I think that technology, data on a large scale, being utilized on a large scale, really hasn't hit healthcare the way it has a lot of other, or at least rehab and performance, right? Like it has commerce, a lot of other industries. So I really think, as we start to see this momentum pick up, it's just really imperative for clinicians to, kind of understand, or, start to engage and find those opportunities where, even low tech entry point, and can work their way up to all the fun, cool stuff that's really going to help them scale it. But, at the end of the day, I think it's been, super helpful from your perspective, right? Of the entry point is simple, not easy, right? But it's simple. It's going to take some work and effort, but those things can be accomplished in a very kind of low tech way. And then when you really want to get scale it, grow it, really maximize that impact, then there's a lot of other opportunities out there. But yeah, anything that you'd like to kind of close with for us?
No, I think you've really summed it up. I think understanding that it's a process that never ends, and then big rocks are always key, and just doing the little things consistently well is high performance, right? So don't discount the conversation, don't discount the range of motion metric that you're looking at, or doing a wellness questionnaire that's how tired are you. Those are all starting points to build off of, and I would just encourage everyone to really commit to their own methodology, and constantly evolve it, because in the end of the day, it's more fun as a practitioner, and your clients are going to benefit the most, for sure.
Awesome.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for your participation. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Steve. And again, we'll follow up with the recording of this. Feel free to learn more at Sparta Science. If you want to get a demo, etc., we'll keep those lines of communication open. And I hope everyone has a great day and evening. Bye-bye now.
Yes.